Hello everybody, this is ManuS and welcome back to the next part of the Eternal set review for Dark Frontier. It's time to move on to part 3 of the Primal cards, and before we do so, you know the drill. Hit the subscribe button, turn on the notification icon to not miss out on future content, and I'll be wrapping up the series with part 4 later today so we can move on to Shadow tomorrow. Sorry for dragging things out so long, sometimes real life gets in the way, and as I said, I will try and rethink a bit on how I put this out for the next set to get it out faster and more efficiently. Alright, so first we have Lightning Sprite. It's a 3-cost 1/4 flyer, so that alone is pretty solid. Like a limited card, this card is pretty great. It has twist 1 to loot, which is amazing. Also turns it into a much bigger flying threat, which is great. Even in Constructed, the card has some potential application in certain built around decks that kind of just want to dig to certain things. Like this is potentially interesting in a Reanimator type deck as alternative to Nocturnal Observer, for example, and stuff like that. Especially because the turn you play it, it can block nicely, but it can't loot the turn you play it unless you play it on turn 4. So that's something to keep in mind. But it's definitely a card that has interesting applications in Constructed and is amazing in Limited. Next we have Peak Top Tracker, another important piece for the whole Scout build around. Like I said, I don't think there's quite enough yet, but this card is one of the cards that's gonna make it viable and powerful in the future if it gets more pieces, because this card is a beast. Like you play this and Scout once or twice the same turn and then you get a monster, and the next turn you just hit for a ton usually. You might have seen me mess around with the Skycrack Scout deck when the set dropped and saw what this card can do. And in Limited it's even more powerful. Like there's more Scout stuff that you can play because the bar for power level is lower and a lot of the Scout cards are not that Constructed viable. So yeah, a great Limited card. Next we have Sudrock's Masterwork. This card's really cool on many levels. It's really flavorful, has a cool name, and this is also actually quite good. Like basically getting an additional Anthem effect for your Obelisk effect. Let's coin it for Eternal. An Obelisk effect for your Yetis and the Snowman created by Thudrock is pretty sweet. The Snowman part is a bit unexpected, but sure, why not? And yeah, the agenda is fine. It's basically just kind of like a bit of utility and tempo. You can fly over them once with your Thudrock, for example, to get a Snowman. It has a snowball to kill something small or finish something off, and of course fend off to just kind of buy yourself some time. Obviously this card's only playable in Yeti decks, but I think in Yeti decks this is quite a powerhouse. And in Limited it kind of depends on, if you have a couple of Yetis I think this is quite playable, otherwise it's pretty underwhelming. Next we have Yeti Instigator, not quite as good as Argentport Instigator, but at least in Limited pretty serviceable between being a Yeti and being just a 3-cost 3/3, which is fine, not great, but fine. Next we have Aggressive Ursine. I'm a bit surprised by how good this card is, honestly. First of all, a 4-cost 4/3 is not terrible in Limited, not great either obviously, but fine. But the Onslaught is really powerful. Giving your other units +2 health permanently if you trigger the Onslaught is really strong, I think. So yeah, this seems like quite a powerhouse in Limited, really, as a 4-drop. Not a Constructed card though. Next we have Bam Sneaky Peeky. Another quite interesting Yeti that I can see being even reasonable in Constructed in a Yeti deck. It's a 4-cost 3/5, and when it attacks you get a 1/1 Yeti Spy, and you can also shift it instead and transform a card of your choice in the enemy market into a Yeti Spy, so it also provides potential disruption. So all in all I think this seems pretty interesting in a more mid-rangey Yeti deck like the one that I made a deck tech about quite some time ago, based on an idea by Ahorn Delphine. And in Limited this obviously is really powerful and an amazing card. Next we have Death from Above. This is kind of like an okay one-off filler finisher type thing, I would say, for an aggressive deck in Limited, like Skycrack aggro. If you have a couple of bigger units, you can just kind of slap that on one and finish the opponent off. All in all, it's not very great. It's pretty expensive and very situational. So it's more of a filler and a one-off, and seems like at least an okay option if you need some kind of finisher. Next we have Elder Meditant. 4 cost, 1/2 Aegis, not very impressive. Sure, for like twist 3 you get to draw a card and turn this into a 2/1, but that's still 7 power and not a whole lot of gain. And sure, you can do that again to trade it in and stuff, but even in limited I think this card is really bad. Like, if you spend your turn 4 playing this, you might as well just like skip it. Next we have Innate Conviction. This is the Primal sort of draw, like marginal effect and draw a powerful card version. Here we get it with Warp, which is quite nice and makes it much better than some of the other options that we've seen, and deals 3 damage. It's still quite expensive for what it does, but the card you draw is pretty sweet. The Arc Dragon is a 3/4 flying Berserk Overwhelm that also has spell damage 1, so a lot of nice things going on here. The thing is though probably that the front side is just kind of still too low impact and expensive, and therefore just not really gonna make it. So yeah, in constructed probably not, but in limited this is a powerhouse, this is a bomb, just slam dunk if you see it. Next we have Lesrai Soothsayer, another kind of cool and interesting card. So it's a 4-cost 2/4 flyer that's alright, like not insane, at least in constructed. In limited this is really good already. But in constructed, if you trigger the onslaught, getting 7 premonition bolts in your deck is pretty sweet, given that they cost 0 and have warp, means they are free. So you can just use them at will, and you can always play them with warp basically. So you never have to like draw them, which is pretty powerful. Obviously it's still 7 in like your 60 plus cards at the time you play this. So it's still kind of high variance, but if you have a lot of cantrips and ways to dig into your deck, this gets better, or if you have multiples. So yeah, the card is quite interesting. It's probably a bit too weak in constructed in the end, and there's too many better options, but it is a pretty cool card, and especially in limited this is quite a powerful card, so another slam dunk in limited if you ask me. Next we have Murderous Flock, a 4-cost 3/3, and when you scout it gets flying this turn. Not great, like not a constructed card at all. Even in limited, not great, but maybe playable if you have a high enough density of scout and need some cards, but it's something that I wouldn't be particularly high on having in my deck, but it's not entirely unplayable, I guess. And last but not least for part 3 we have Ferocity of Bear. Give 2 of your units killer. This is too low impact and expensive for constructed, but however in limited this seems like a pretty solid card. It's still kind of situational and depends a bit on what color you pair it with, but it can be pretty brutal and kind of like a nice card advantage and board advantage type play. So just evaluate if your deck has enough units that are good enough at fighting opposing units more often than not, and then this could be a great card. Alright, this concludes part 3 of the Primal cards. I will be back later with the last part of the Primal cards and the top 5, and then we'll move on to the remaining Shadow cards. Until then, if you enjoy the content, hit the like button, subscribe, turn on the notification icon to not miss out on more. Share it with your friends, leave a comment to let me know what you think. And yeah, that's it again for this time. I'm your host ManuS, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.